There were some things that happened on Zion's camp that are of tremendous significance. And we need to take a look at what some of those things are. Now, Zion's camp, the whole journey, if you take a look at this, it actually began south of Lake Erie and went across Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri. They went approximately 1,000 miles in 60 days, or 2 months. So you can see basically where they went across. There were some very, very significant things that happened on Zion's camp. And my personal feeling is that although the stated purpose for Zion's camp was never fulfilled, nevertheless, it did fulfill some very important other things. Primarily was that this gave the opportunity for the next 3 prophets of the church to actually have personal tutelage under the prophet Joseph Smith. And that would take the church forward for many, many years after that. Many people have not heard of the Zelph Mound account. There's one place where church history intersects with Book of Mormon history, and that is at the Hill Cumorah in New York. But many people do not realize that this is another potential place where church history and Book of Mormon history intersect. On June the 2nd of 1834, Joseph Smith, along with several members of the now famous Zion's camp, crossed the Illinois River, camped on the west bank. The next morning, on June the 3rd of 1834, Joseph, with several other brethren, visited a prominent mound on top of the bluffs overlooking the river, which had been located the previous day by a reconnaissance party. This location today is approximately a mile south of Valley City, Illinois, on what is now known as Naples-Russell Mound number 8. Joseph Smith went up on this mound with the 12 brethren, 8 of which then wrote this down in their personal journals, and 3 of them actually became future prophets of the church. So this is a very highly corroborated account of what happened. Joseph Smith asked for a shovel. They dug down approximately a foot and then found some bones. Within the bones there was an arrowhead. And this arrowhead then, when they pulled it out, it was made of black Yellowstone obsidian. It was actually retained by the brethren and then ultimately got back into the hands of Brigham Young, later put it then into the archives of the church. It was approximately 4 inches in length, and this is a copy of that original arrowhead. So it gives you an idea of the size and the shape of this. This was actually made by a professional napper in Chicago and given to me by a good friend of mine. So what happened then is highly corroborated, and this is what the prophet Joseph Smith was understood to say while standing on the mound that day. He said, "The visions of the past being opened to my understanding by the Spirit of the Almighty." Now what is Joseph Smith having here? Okay, he's having a vision, right? It says, "I discovered that the person whose skeleton was before us was a white Lamanite, a large, thick-set man, and a man of God. His name was Zelph. He was a warrior and chieftain under the great prophet Onondagas, who was known from the Hill Cumorah or Eastern Sea to the Rocky Mountains. He was killed in battle by the arrow found among his ribs during the last great struggle with the Lamanites and the Nephites." This is recorded in the History of the Church, Volume 2. This is June 3rd, 1834, in the 1948 edition. Joseph Smith claims that this prophet Onondagas was known from the Hill Cumorah or Eastern Sea and apparently related those two together to the Rocky Mountains. Did Joseph Smith just give us some clues about the potential geography of the Book of Mormon? Well, I believe that he did. And again, this was not his opinion. This was a revelation that he received through the Spirit about Zelph. Charles Allen, in 1975, was asked to identify Zelph's mound. And so he went back and went through the old plat maps and so forth and identified the ferry crossing where they would ferry across the Illinois River by using the actual accounts of the brethren that were there on Zion's camp that day. He actually was able then to identify specifically Zelph's mound.
How I found this site was actually 1975. There was a couple of different theories on where Zion's camp crossed the Illinois River. A few miles south is a town called Florence, and that was one of the major crossings of the Illinois River at that time. And there were other crossings up and down the river. We found that Zion's Camp, in some of the journals, they crossed at Phillips Ferry. So the idea was to find where Phillips Ferry was actually located, because the journals said that they went about a mile south of camp where they found this large mound. And so the key point was to find Phillips Ferry. I was able to discover that at Phillips Ferry crossing on the Illinois River there was going to be a town built called Velasco, and it was in the year of 1834. And the individual who was speculating offered a sale of the lots of this Velasco open for what do you call it, auction. And they weren't bringing enough money, the money that he wanted, and so he ended the auction that day, and the town never was built. But the plat of the town survived, and it was in the county records at Pittsfield, which is a few miles south of here. And so I went to the county courthouse and I found a copy of the plat, and having worked with surveyors over the years, I knew that they had to have coordinates in order to establish a city. It had to be legally identified. And so I knew that if I could find those coordinates and could locate where Phillips Ferry was in relation to maybe a section line, then I could find where the mound was. And so as I studied the plat, the north line of the plat lined up with the section line of the north part of the section here. And so I just using actual simple mathematics, added up the blocks and found out that the ferry was about 728 feet south of the section line. So I found the section line as it is today and stepped off about 728 feet and said, okay, this is where the ferry landed, or was to land, in the city that never was built. And so then I drove a mile south, which is to this location. The mound was already known then. It was a huge mound. The state of Illinois had it marked, and it was part of the I think it's called the Naples-Russell or Russell-Naples mound structure. There's 8 different mounds here. This is the largest of the group. The thing that I had to do was to see if this indeed fit the description of Zion's Camp. And so when I drove to the base of this bluff structure, I found it was 9/10 of a mile below the ferry crossing, which would have been Zion's Camp's site for that evening. So I think it pretty well verified the fact that this mound behind me was the mound where the ancient white Lamanite Zelph was buried. 1975, they were able to determine that this was Zelph's mound. It took centuries to build. They just didn't build a large mound to bury somebody in. They usually laid them on the ground, put some dirt in, and over centuries it built up. So there were layers of remains of individuals.
This is actually a photograph of Zelph's mound. It still exists there today. In fact, there's artifacts that have been recovered. There was a 2-foot trench that was excavated. Several artifacts were taken from that mound. Carbon dating has been done on that, and in fact, the carbon dating comes back between 250 to 350 AD, which would be right in the ballpark that needed to be for this to actually occur and the time frame that Joseph Smith indicates. Now, Donald Q. Cannon has written a wonderful article, and it's called Zelph Revisited. Donald Q. Cannon was with the BYU Department of Church History and Doctrine, and this was written up in Church History Regional Studies. The journal accounts of Joseph Smith's activities in his letter indicate that he believed that Book of Mormon history, or at least a part of it, transpired in North America. What does one do with such a prophetic statement? Some have dismissed it as a joke or playful exercise of Joseph's imaginations. Others, on the other hand, have chosen to emphasize discrepancies and possible contradictions in the source accounts, thereby discrediting what Joseph Smith said about Zelph. He goes on to say, it seems to me that either approach carries heavy risks. When one chooses to state that Joseph Smith can't be taken seriously on this issue, the door is open to question his statements on other issues. Where does it stop? Does the first vision with the discrepancies in the primary source accounts also come under the same doubt and skepticism applied here to Zelph? Why can't we simply take Joseph Smith at his word? And I think that is very, very well stated. There are those who have tried to discount Zelph's account because if it is true, if it is a real account, and that really did occur, then that puts Book of Mormon history squarely in the heartland of America, not in other locations where the Book of Mormon is proposed to have been. A couple of days after this account of Zelph and what happened there on the mound overlooking the Illinois River, Joseph Smith was pondering about these things, and he was writing a letter to his sweetheart, Emma. It's about a 4-page letter. The actual source document is still in the hands of the RLDS Church and has been verified as being a genuine document. And this is a handwritten letter from Joseph Smith to his wife, Emma, on June the 4th, 1834. And Joseph Smith writes again, "The whole of our journey in the midst of so large a company of social, honest, and sincere men, wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as a proof of its divine authenticity." So Joseph Smith, in fact, himself knew that there was going to be physical evidences for what he knew spiritually to be true. In this map, you can see in the vertically lined areas, you can see what is called the Hopewell people. Now, the Hopewell people are also known as the mound builders. These are the people that built mounds all over back east. Those of you who have been back there may know a little bit about this. Now, the Hopewell mound building people, according to mainstream archaeological timeframes, their civilization flourished between about 100 years before Christ and abruptly ended approximately 400 AD. How well does that fit with what we understand from the rise and the fall of the Nephite civilization in the Book of Mormon? Now, I took this map and actually placed it onto the topographic map that I had the Zion's Camp march on. When I turned on the Zion's Camp layer on this map, it was going right through the middle, or the heartland, of the people who are called the Hopewell people, who match up with the time frame to have been Nephites. If this is the promised land, and this was where this is a civilization that occurred at the time of the Nephites, Joseph Smith literally and Zion's Camp took those brethren from one end of that civilization, from the eastern side, through the middle of it, to the western side, and stopped. This brings another question. Where did the prophet Joseph Smith place the Hill Cumorah? In Joseph Smith history, it says it was convenient to the village of Manchester, Ontario County, New York. There's a hill of considerable size, the most elevated of any in the neighborhood. Now, Joseph Smith didn't specifically name the Hill Cumorah as the hill where he received the plates. However, whatever hill it was that he received the plates from was some place in New York. It was not in Central America where he received those plates.